Great to see you this morning. Thank you for being here. Pastor Joe, as I mentioned earlier, is up in Minnesota with Angela. His oldest daughter, Natalie, is getting married in October, so they are going dress shopping. And all of the guys are like, it's better to be here than it is to be there. That's for sure. But anyway, I have the pleasure of being with you today, and it's a pleasure to look out and see sunshine in like 57 degrees. Jerry said he might go fishing today. Gary just got back from ice fishing at 20 below, so hopefully he didn't bring that weather back with him. But we do want to remind you what we've been doing the last several weeks. Tracy's been so great to do this. If you have the YouVersion Bible app on your phone, all of the message notes are on there for today. Pull up the app. On the bottom right-hand corner, there's a menu tab. Choose Events. If your location services are enabled, Heartland Community Church will populate. Just click on that. You can save the notes for later future reference. You can add your own notes as well. It's a pretty cool feature. So I want to invite you to do that. But I've got a question for you this morning that I want you to contemplate. And the question is this: how do you know that someone is your true friend? I want you to think about that for a second. How do you know that someone is your true friend? We live in a culture where it's really easy to be friends with people on social media. But with social media, there are pretty much two qualifiers for being a friend. One, you know them, or at least you've heard of them, or you've seen them once. And secondly, they're not your enemy. So if they're not your enemy, I mean, they're your friend, right? That's pretty much the qualifications of being a friend on social media. You know them, they're not your enemy, let's be friends. Now, in the real world, typically we'll have a little bit higher expectation than that, right? Now, you might have 1,000 friends on social media, but if people ask you who your true friends are, how many close friends you have, you might say like 3 or 4. And the reason for that is we have different standards, we have different expectations. We all understand that there's more to being a friend than just calling yourself a friend. Kind of like Christianity, right? There's more to being a Christian than just calling yourself a Christian. And obviously, there are a lot of different traits that we look for in friends. I don't know if this is just mainly a lady thing or what, but Becky, before we started dating, she made her list of qualities she's looking for in a guy. How many of you ladies did that? Just wave at me a little bit. Ouch. I met all of the qualifications except for one, thank you very much. And it was a list of like 20 things. Only thing was I didn't play guitar or something like that. You can't get everything you want. You can't get everything you want. How many of you guys did that? Couple. 3, okay. I thought the ratios would be about like that. We don't usually do that with friends, but I think all of us in our minds, we kind of have an idea of things that we look for in a friend, traits that we would expect to have. Well, there's one trait that I believe consistently proves the depth of a relationship, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. It's loyalty. It's loyalty. I mean, how many disloyal best friends do you have? If that number is higher than 0, you probably want to start looking for some new best friends. Even Jesus said it this way in Matthew chapter 20, verse 30. Whoever is not with me is against me, and anyone who does not work with me is working against me. See, a true friendship demonstrates loyalty. If you've ever been on the other side of disloyalty, you understand why this is such an important thing, right? My wife Becky and I, we once attended a church where we established a pretty strong relationship with a couple. We had a lot of fun together. We made memories together. We confided in each other. If we were to make a list of our top 3 friends at this location, this couple would have been, on that list. But then there came a turning point. There was a situation where at least we felt like our relationship with this couple was used as a means to leverage something against us. And they were put in a situation where they basically had to choose sides. And we were left on the outside looking in. And it felt like they were being disloyal. And if you've ever experienced that, it stinks. It hurts. It feels like a sucker punch in the gut. It's like being falsely accused of a serious crime and then finding out that it was your best friend who sold you out. It's almost like somebody just committed treason against you. How many of you have been there? I see a lot of heads nodding. Disloyalty, it feels personal. It cuts deep. It can penetrate down into the depths of your soul. And if you're not careful, it'll plant seeds of bitterness that will tear up your spiritual fruit. If you hold on to it, it'll prevent you from bearing spiritual fruit in your own life. That's something that Becky and I, we had to continuously battle. To say that our experience didn't affect us personally, be a lie, because it did. Disloyalty for us is severely damaged our trust in people. It made us a lot more skeptical, and it made us a lot more cynical. What we did is we built up invisible barriers or invisible walls around us to where it was almost like we put people at arm's length. For me personally, I recognize in my life that I became more selfish. I can think of a particular instance even after everything went down where I was like, you know what? If this is the way that people are going to treat me, then I'm just going to look out for myself. I think a lot of us have felt that way one time or another, right? And it's taken years. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's taken years of the Holy Spirit working in us to undo some of the pain and some of the results that came from disloyalty. The truth is, disloyalty is ugly. Disloyalty can completely destroy a relationship. It can forever wound somebody. However, to just allow that to happen in our lives is to give Satan a foothold. And I don't know about you, I'm not in the business of allowing Satan to win. I'm on this side because I want to push back the gates of hell. I don't want Satan to get the last word. I don't want him to have the victory over me. I don't want him to plant weeds of bitterness in my life that would choke up my spiritual fruit. Now, I've got one Lord in my life. It's not Satan. I recognize the disloyalty is ugly. But as ugly as it is, you realize there's something equally as beautiful on the other side. I can have, my grandma used to always say, you want to have a little pity party for yourself? You know, I could have a little pity party for myself. I could feel bad about how people have mistreated me. I could get angry. I could get bitter. I could allow those things to grow up in my life, or I can choose to focus on the positive. And the positive is that as ugly as disloyalty is, there's something as beautiful on the opposite end of the spectrum called loyalty. I can focus on the disloyalty, or I can choose to focus on the loyalty. Because when practiced, there are few things that solidify a relationship as much as loyalty. There are few things that inspire more devotion or develop a greater amount of respect than loyalty. There are few things that paint such a clear picture of love and of commitment than loyalty. Loyalty is one of the single greatest proofs of our true friendship with God. I want you to get that this morning. Our loyalty is one of the single greatest proofs of our true friendship with God. You see, our affection for God will always be demonstrated by our loyalty to God. Our affection for God will always be demonstrated by our loyalty to God. You want to know one of the greatest things about loyalty too? Is true loyalty goes both ways. True loyalty goes both ways. There's probably, as you look throughout Scripture, there's probably no human being in all of Scripture who understood that better than a guy named Daniel. So today we're going to look in, as we're going through this series, Lessons from the Fathers of Faith, we're going to look at some lessons from Daniel's life. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into his story, and we'll uncover the beauty of loyalty, especially as it pertains to our relationship with God. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are a good God, that you are a faithful God, that you are a loyal God. Lord, I know that you have something in store for us today. So Lord, speak it to us and let it penetrate our souls. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I want to begin by sharing a little bit of Daniel's background story. Any of you all into a little bit of history? I'm a history guy. I'm a sentimental with it when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give you a little bit of Daniel's background story. It starts with his story. Daniel is a young Jewish man, probably a teenager, who lived in the southern kingdom of Judah. If you're familiar with Israel's history, it was broken into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Well, he resided in the lower kingdom of Judah. Well, Judah's capital city, you might have heard of it, was Jerusalem. Well, Jerusalem was attacked and conquered by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. That's a fun word to say, Nebuchadnezzar. Say it 20 times fast, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, he came in, he ransacked the temple of God. He then kidnapped the king of Judah, and then he took other Israelites as prisoners to live in exile in Babylon. Well, it just so happened that Daniel was one of those young men who was taken as an exile to live in Babylon. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar came home from war, from the battle, he recruited some of Judah's exiles to serve in his court. Here are some of the qualifications that he was looking for. He was looking for young men who had no physical limitations, young men who were handsome, who were skilled in wisdom, who were discerning, who were understanding. These young men would go through pretty much a 3-year apprenticeship to learn the language, to learn what they expected, and then they would be brought in to serve in the king's court. Again, Daniel was one of these young men who was chosen. He was one of the exile young men to go through this apprenticeship. Now, I want you to put yourself in Daniel's shoes for a little bit. All right, imagine being a teenager, living in the comfortable surrounding of your family and your friends and your other peers. Then in a short time, all of a sudden, your world is flipped upside down. Your world is thrown into complete chaos because an enemy pinpoints your city, an enemy pinpoints your nation, comes in, kidnaps your ruler. Think about that for a second. Think if an enemy country came in and kidnapped our president. All of a sudden, I remember 9/11, when that happened, all of a sudden you felt vulnerable. Can you imagine the feeling of vulnerability if your leader is taken? So his ruler was kidnapped. Daniel was ripped away from his family and whisked into a strange pagan country where he didn't even speak the language. I mean, talk about your stress and anxiety levels going through the roof. You thought it was stressful to be a teenager in America? Try being in Daniel's shoes for a minute. Now, things get pretty interesting for Daniel because even though he's in exile, again, he's involved in this apprenticeship in the king's court. Naturally, you might think that's a pretty good thing. It's better to be an apprentice in the king's court than to be a prisoner of war and just be thrown into a work camp or something, right? However, it didn't come without some complications. Daniel quickly found out that his loyalty to God, as an exile in this foreign country, his loyalty to God was going to be tested. Again, the reality was that Daniel was a devoted young Jewish man who found himself smack dab in the middle of a pagan culture. if he was going to remain strong in his faith, he was going to have to be intentional about it. We've been talking a lot about intentional church, right? We've got a banner on the back wall. Daniel had to be intentional about being a child of God. But at the same time, he'd have to use a healthy amount of discretion. As Daniel's friends would soon find out, not submitting to the king's way of doing things would result in pretty harsh punishment. So Daniel had a few friends who were brought into exile with him, and their names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You probably know them better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And when they didn't bow down to the king, they got thrown into the fiery furnace. I mean, there were some pretty harsh consequences for a child of God living in a pagan culture. So the point is, Daniel was going to have to determine pretty early how dedicated he was to God in his faith. I mean, this could very literally be a life or death decision for him. Even so, it became pretty readily apparent that Daniel was committed to God. Daniel was a true friend of God. How do we know that? One word: loyalty. Loyalty. Now, what's really cool is as you read through Daniel's story, you discover this cycle of loyalty that appears. And we're going to dive into that a little bit, and I'm going to introduce it and reintroduce it to you, and it's pretty cool how it happens. But as we do, remember that loyalty is a two-way street. A friendship with God is an exception to that. Now, God doesn't promise us a pain-free life on this side of heaven. He says, in this world you will have troubles, you will have problems, but I do know this from experience. God always takes care of his kids. God always takes care of his kids. Especially when we show our loyalty to God, it's almost impossible not to see God's loyalty shown back on you. So I'm going to introduce you to this pattern. I'm going to get you involved in this a little bit. Here's the pattern of loyalty that we're going to hit on several times this morning. The pattern was this. I'm going to do it by pointing fingers just to help you remember. Daniel was loyal to God, and God was loyal to Daniel. As a result, God was honored, and Daniel was blessed. That's our pattern. I'm going to say it again. I want you to point with me. Are you ready? Shake those little fingers. Get those fingers ready. All right. Here's the cycle of loyalty we see. Daniel was loyal to God. Everybody point up. Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to Daniel. As a result, God was honored and Daniel was blessed. Let's do it again. Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to Daniel. What happened as a result? God was honored. Daniel was blessed. Let's do it one more time. Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to Daniel. As a result, God was honored and Daniel was blessed. So let's dive into the story a little bit. Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. Start in verse 1, go through verse 13. I'm in the contemporary English version, if you care. During the second year that Nebuchadnezzar was king, he had such horrible nightmares that he could not sleep. So he called in his counselors, his advisors, his magicians, and his wise men. And he said, I am disturbed by a dream that I don't understand, and I want you to explain it. So they answered him in Aramaic, Your Majesty, we hope you live forever. Suck-ups, you know. We are your servants. Please tell us your dream, and then we'll explain to you what it means. But the king replied, No, I've made up my mind. If you don't tell me both the dream and its interpretation, its meaning, you will be chopped to pieces and your houses will be torn down. I think he had a little temper. However, if you do tell me both the dream and its meaning, you will be greatly rewarded and highly honored. Now tell me the dream and explain its meaning to me. Your Majesty, they said, if you will only tell us your dream, You can see how it's played out. We will interpret it for you. The king replied, you are just stalling for time because you know what's going to happen if you don't come up with the answer. You've decided to make up a bunch of lies hoping that I might change my mind. Now tell me the dream, and it will prove that you can interpret it. His advisors explained, Your Majesty, you are demanding the impossible. No king, not even the most famous and powerful, has ever ordered his advisors, his magicians, or his wise men to do such a thing. It cannot be done except by the gods, and they don't live here. They don't live here on earth. And this made the king so angry that he gave orders for every wise man in Babylonia to be put to death, including Daniel and his 3 friends. Talk about being thrown into an impossible situation. The wise men were asked to do something that was not humanly possible. Imagine, I think we have people come up to us like, hey, you'll never believe this, or hey, guess what I dreamed? Okay, I don't know. Tell me what you dreamed. Like, imagine if somebody came up to you like, hey, guess what I dreamed? You're like, oh, dude, I so know. This is what you dreamed. This is what it meant. Be like, whoa, that just doesn't happen. Why? Because it's not humanly possible. We don't have that kind of telepathic ability. So they were thrown into this impossible situation. Basically what it meant is all of the wise men were going to be torn apart, literally. But there was a small glimmer of hope. Out of nowhere came a glimmer of hope. You see, Daniel and his friends were friends with God. And God is God of the impossible. Daniel and his friends were friends with God. And God is God of what? God is God of what? The impossible. Knowing that, Daniel made a bold move. He approaches King Nebuchadnezzar. You know what he asked for? He asked for more time. What just happened a little bit ago? Remember, the king said, you're stalling. Because of that, off with your limbs. And so Daniel has the gall to approach King Nebuchadnezzar and ask for more time. That's a pretty bold move. Like, he could have been killed right there. Surprisingly enough, the king grants him his wish. And this is where Daniel's loyalty to God starts to show up. Daniel goes to his friends and he said, guys, we got to pray. Let's get on our faces before God and let's beg him for mercy that he would give us the dream as well as its interpretation so that we don't have to die, so that all these other people don't have to die. How did that prove Daniel's loyalty? Well, it's because for Daniel, God was the only option, not the last resort. For Daniel, God was the only option. He wasn't the last resort. Daniel didn't first explore other options. He didn't hold a brainstorm meeting where they try to come up with ways around what the king was asking. He didn't cry out to the Babylonian gods, which is something probably Israel of old would have done. No, what Daniel did is what he always did. He went to God first. He went to God first. See, Daniel had already established a good relationship with God. He had already had an established friendship with God. He knew who God was. He understood what God could do. He understood how God had come through for him in the past. God's ever come through for you in the past? Will you just wave at me? Hey there, hey there. God's come through for you. Daniel realized how many times God had come through for him in the past. So again, what did he do? He went to God. When you're as loyal to God as Daniel was, it seems juvenile to pursue any other options. Like, why would I do that? I know God. Because of it, Daniel and his friends prayed. It's a good place just to hit pause for a second, to do a little bit of self-evaluation. Let's look at Daniel's life now. Let's see what lessons we can learn from it. Ask yourself this question: is God my only option, or do I treat him as my last resort? Is God my only option, or do I treat him as if he's my last resort? The answer to that question will give you a pretty good idea about the depth of your loyalty to God. If you're always looking for workarounds, if you're always looking for other alternatives, if you're trying everything else out, and then when it doesn't work, you're like, oh, maybe I should pray to God because this is awful. I've tried everything. For Daniel, God was his only option, not his last resort. Why? Well, it's because Daniel was loyal to God. You know what happened when Daniel was loyal to God? I'll give you one guess. God was loyal to Daniel, right? That very night, God came to Daniel in a vision that revealed both the king's dream and its interpretation. By doing this, God unlocked the secret that would save Daniel's life as well as the lives of other people. Think about that. So the next day, now armed with the answer from God, Daniel approaches King Nebuchadnezzar. I love how he approached the king, though. Because I think some of us would be tempted to walk in kind of with our chest puffed out and walking into King Nebuchadnezzar and be like, hey, here's your dream. Here's what it meant. Peace out. And just walk away. I mean, wouldn't that be fun? And the king's like, jaw drops, like, oh my goodness, like, dude, like, who is this guy? But no, instead, he went in with his normal humility and with his loyalty. The first thing that Daniel did when he approached the king is he lifted up God. He wasn't like, hey, I got your answer, king. He gave credit to God. He then proceeded to tell the king what his dream was, as well as the interpretation. What happened next is pretty cool. And remember the process of loyalty. Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to Daniel. As a result, God was honored. Let's read what the pagan king of Babylon did, or what he said after receiving the dream and the interpretation. He told Daniel this in Daniel 2, verse 47. Truly, your God is the greatest of gods. Your God is the Lord over all kings. He's the revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. I'm pretty sure King Nebuchadnezzar just got his elevation worship going on right there. This pagan king was lifting up the name of God. Think about that. Even by a pagan king, God was being honored through the loyalty of Daniel in the midst of a pagan culture. Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to Daniel. As a result, God was honored and Daniel was blessed. Daniel 2, verses 48 and 49. Then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all of his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remember those guys? To be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. Again, remember, loyalty to God brings honor to him, and ultimately it brings blessing to us. That doesn't mean that you're going to be appointed vice president of the United States, something like that. But I guarantee you, as you are loyal to God, it'll bring honor to him, and it will bring blessing to you as well. We see this again in Daniel chapter 6. Man, if you haven't read Daniel, read through the book of Daniel. This is some good stuff. So Daniel chapter 6, we pick up with our second and final story. At this time, King Nebuchadnezzar, he's out of the picture. Again, he was the king of Babylon. Well, Babylon was conquered by Persia. And it's believed that the Persian king Cyrus appointed the next ruler over Babylon, which was Darius the Mede. So Darius and Daniel, they've got a pretty good relationship going on. In fact, Darius thought so highly of Daniel that he placed him as one of just 3 leaders to supervise all of the high officers in Babylon. Not only that, he had intention of placing him over everybody. Daniel had favor. Daniel had a great relationship with Darius. But just because Darius liked Daniel doesn't mean that everybody liked him. Just because God liked Daniel didn't mean that everybody did. I like you all, but that doesn't mean that everybody does. We understand that. And so there were a bunch of other leaders who looked at Daniel and they saw the favor that he had with Darius, and they were jealous. So they looked for ways to take out Daniel. We read about it in Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 4. They tried to find reasons, They tried to find reasons to accuse Daniel. So they watched what Daniel did as he went about doing the business of the government. But they could not find anything wrong with him, so they could not accuse him of doing anything wrong. Daniel was a man that people could trust. He did not cheat the king, and he worked very hard. Finally, they said, we will never find any reason to accuse Daniel of doing something wrong. So we must find something to complain about that is connected to the law of his God. So the 2 supervisors and the satraps went as a group to the king. They said, King Darius, live forever. Suck-ups again. The supervisors, the prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors, basically, we've all been talking and we all agree on something. Here's what we agree on. We think that the king should make this law that everyone must obey. For the next 30 days, whoever prays to any god or man except for you, king, will be thrown into the lion's den. That'll teach him. Now, king, make the law and sign the paper it is written on, so that it cannot be changed, because the laws of the Medes and the Persians cannot be canceled or changed. So King Darius made the law, and he signed it. As you read through that story, you begin to see Daniel's loyalty to God come out. Did you notice it? Did you notice it? I'm going to bring it out here. It becomes clearly apparent that Daniel's loyalty was reflected through his integrity. Daniel's loyalty to God was reflected through his integrity. He was trustworthy. He was honest. He was dependable. He was a hard worker. Even through the extensive vetting process. You know the vetting process that when somebody decides they're going to run for office, everybody's looking at all of their past and trying to dig up the dirt? That's what they were doing. Daniel's life was under a microscope. You know how many wrong things they found out about him? That's a demonstration of his loyalty to God right there. This is another good time to get out your remote. Let's hit pause. Let's do a little self-reflection. If other people were to closely monitor your life and put you under a microscope in the same way that these people did Daniel, what would come out? What would our integrity or our lack thereof say about our loyalty to God? I mean, a lot of us will just throw stuff out there on social media, right? Sometimes there's stuff there, but if somebody would look deeper at our lives, if they would look deeper at our interactions, if they would see us at work, they would see us in our relationship with other people, if they would just search our attitudes and our motives, what would they see? What would our integrity or our lack thereof say about our loyalty to God? For Daniel, his loyalty could not be called into question. In fact, the jealous leaders determined that the only way that they could bring Daniel down was by trying to coerce him to be disloyal to God. They knew that wouldn't happen, and so that's the reason why they put this law into effect. Now, this new law would prohibit Daniel from following through his normal routine. Daniel had a normal routine of being loyal to God, and what that meant was going to his upstairs room, kneeling down, and praying to God 3 times a day with his window wide open toward Jerusalem, his home city. Now, if he kept with this routine, there would be some severe consequences. He would be thrown into the lion's den. That's not exactly the ideal way to die, right? If you know that it's your time, you're not like, you know what? I think an adventurous way to go would be being thrown into a pit of lions and letting me be torn apart. I want to go that way. There's something seriously wrong with you if that's it. I'm all for adventure. I don't recommend that. It's not an ideal way to die. But you know what Daniel did after he had found out about the law? He went upstairs to his room, he knelt down, and he prayed to God 3 times a day with his window wide open, facing his home city of Jerusalem. Notice what Daniel didn't do. He didn't start praying with his window closed. He didn't draw the blinds or shut the curtains. He didn't come up with excuses or justifications not to pray. God, you know I love you, right? I just can't do this how I've been doing it, so I think what I'm going to do from now on, as I lay down to sleep and close my eyes, I'm going to pray silently. That way I'm still praying and nobody's going to notice. He didn't do that. He didn't make excuses. He didn't apologize for anything. Instead, you know what he did? He went up to his upstairs room. He knelt down. He prayed 3 times a day with his window wide open, facing Jerusalem, his home city. Now, it's that loyalty that led Daniel to be arrested. He was arrested and he was thrown into a pit of lions. Wait a second. Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to him by letting him be thrown into a pit of lions? What's up with that? Kind of breaks with what we're going here. Wait a second, the story's not over. Something extraordinary happened. Remember, Daniel was friends with God, and God is the God of what? Possible. Daniel was friends with God, and God is the God of what? The impossible. Just as Daniel was loyal to God, guess what? God was loyal to Daniel. God sent an angel to come down into that pit of lions, and he shut the lions' mouths, and he saved Daniel's life again. Daniel was loyal to God, and God was loyal to Daniel. Daniel chapter 6, verse 20. Daniel, servant of the living God. This is King Darius. Again, Daniel and Darius had a good relationship. Darius didn't want Daniel to be thrown into the lions, but because he signed it into law, he had to follow it. So he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he goes to the pit that had been closed, and he screams out to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to save you from the lions? You always serve your God. Daniel answered, Daniel answered, King, live forever. Suck up. My God sent his angel to save me. The angel closed the lions' mouths. The lions have not hurt me because God knows that I'm innocent. I never did anything wrong to you, King. Daniel was then lifted out of the lion's den without even a scratch on his body. Then King Darius He's like, I see what all you people tried to do to Daniel, and he took those people and threw them in the lion's den. Before they hit the bottom, they were torn apart. But after he did that, King Darius sent a proclamation that brought honor to God. He sent a message to people of every race and nation and language throughout the world that declared God's glory and power. King Darius was kind of like a missionary, and he didn't know it. Every tongue and tribe and nation, he proclaimed the glory of God. And he wasn't even a follower of God. Think about that. Again, Daniel was loyal to God. God was loyal to Daniel. As a result, God was honored. I think there's one more part to that too, right? What's the other part? Daniel was blessed. Daniel 6:26. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Let's bring this to a wrap. There one thing that we can learn from Daniel's life, a lesson from the father of faith. What would it be? If we were to follow one action point from his example, what would it be? I don't even need to tell you, do I? Be loyal to God. You guys are good students today. Be loyal to God. When you're searching for answers in life, be loyal to God by making Him your only option and not your last resort. In matters of integrity, be loyal to God in ways that are undeniable to other people, where they see your integrity, they see your work ethic, they see your attitude, they see your character come out. And when the culture around you frowns on your faith, be loyal to God by being a person of courage. Don't be afraid to talk about your God. Be friends with God, the God of the impossible. Because when you're loyal to God, you can have confidence that God will be loyal to you. As a result, God will be honored and you will be blessed. God takes care of His kids. God takes care of His kids. I want to invite worship team to go ahead and come on up if you would. Would you bow your heads, close your eyes with me this morning?